Let's bring in former Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, Fox News contributor Karl Rove. Karl Rove says the GOP's dreams have collided with interest group lobbying and the tax system's reality. Your thoughts? Does this get done?
I think it does get done. The question is how much gets done. First of all, there's a difference between tax reform, in which we get rid of a lot of the preferences in the law and so special treatment for certain groups, and tax cuts, in which we simply reduce the rates. And the Republicans started the year hoping for a big dose of tax reform that would allow them to do an even bigger tax cut, because by getting rid of some of those preferences and special treatment in the law, that frees up, it makes it easier for you to get a bigger tax cut because you're, quote, paying for it by getting rid of the special breaks that you give people.
Hey, Karl, what are the special breaks in the code right now that you think the Republicans in the House and Senate could tolerate getting rid of to help push along the reform part of a tax overhaul?
Yeah. Well, a lot of them are highly technical. One of the more visible and larger ones was mentioned in the Wall Street Journal this morning, which is the tax deduction for state and local taxes. You see the Texas State Capitol over my shoulder. We don't have an income tax. So in Texas, every Texan lacks a break on their, quote, state income tax because we don't have one. In New York, you get a break. You get to, in essence, deduct the cost of your taxes paid to the state, or if you live in the city of New York, to New York City. So that's popular in red states, not so popular in blue states. But it's a big tax preference that sort of is a bias towards states that have high tax rates.
Yeah, a bias, Heather, toward all those extremely liberal states. Yeah. I love when Democrats get upset about taking a tax break away from them. So I find that high comedy. But
it is. And I'm a person who lives in New York but wishes I lived in Texas. Karl, isn't this a lot of the hyperventilating that we're seeing, sort of the same movie we've seen before, which is that Trump proposes something, it's pronounced dead on arrival, or, you know, it's in trouble and it's never going to happen. But in fact, he's changed the terms of debate, and the real question is how much we now get. But we really are going to move towards something. And why is reform really off the table?
Yeah. Well, look, you're right. There's a lot of hostility towards tax cuts by the media. I remember the Bush tax cuts in 2001 were pronounced dead several times before they got passed in May, late May of 2001. So we're likely to see that happen here as well. But look, realistically, talking to the people inside this process of House Ways and Means and Senate Finance, they had hoped to be further along now than they are. One of the big reasons why is that the plan that was laid out in June of 2016, and which was sort of pushed earlier this year, included a big tax reform called the border adjustment tax. In essence, it's a sort of a VAT-like, a value-added tax-like provision in our law, which would take a tax off of American exports and add a tax on to imports into our country, much like every other industrialized country in the world does. However, this has run into a lot of resistance from senators, in particular from states with the headquarters of big importers like Walmart. Mm-hmm. So this was a big way that could, in essence, pay for a much bigger reduction in the tax rates, because you'd be generating revenue by doing so, which would offset the cuts in the rates. But yeah, we're going to get it done. My sense is, though, that it's going to take a little bit longer than even the skeptics had believed, and certainly a lot longer than most people had believed.
So, Karl, you were in the White House when it was, it was antagonistic then. It's antagonistic now times 10. We're going into a campaign of resist. I mean, where the answer is resist. What's the question? What advice would you give the current administration on how to sell this tax plan? How can they change the conversation around it from dead on arrival to here's the things that are going to benefit the American public?
Yeah, well, talk about it, for one thing. I mean, we spend way too much time talking about fake news and Russia and blah, 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 and not enough time, in my opinion, talking about jobs, economy, prosperity, growth, opportunity, all of which is going to be driven enormously by getting the tax code in a better shape. By cutting taxes and reforming taxes, we will encourage economic growth, which will mean more jobs, better paychecks, more opportunity, more prosperity, and the president's voice is powerful in this. So I'd rather have him tweeting and talking and speaking about these issues than talking about a lot of things that we seem to get stuck in, conversing
now,
about.
Karl, I got to correct you. We talk about jobs and tax cuts and tax reform and health care reform on Fox Business nonstop. Certainly,
well,
more
that's why you're a rapidly growing network and your programs are so popular. Except I got to tell you, I'm a little bit worried about some of your advertisers. I mean, when you have ads for fit pants, black fit pants, and they use the word butt in them, I think you need to have a family-friendly warning before those ads. I mean, really.
Karl, that is family-friendly if you're talking about the way that I speak when I don't have a microphone on. But I want to point to Kevin Brady in terms of managing expectations and really starting to get this ball rolling in terms of tax reform. But also, like with the health care reform bill, you had Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, tempering expectations that the Senate will pass an overhaul, promising his colleagues a vote but not success. This was in an interview that he did in the last several days. But again, I put the blame not on President Trump and what's happening now at the White House, but these people who have been promising this for 7 years, who aren't on the stick.
Well, look, in the House, they had a plan that they laid out last June of 2016, called the Better Way, voted upon by the Republican caucus, adopted. And you're right. Now it's easy when you're in the minority or you're in the congressional majority, but you don't have the White House to sort of say, here's what we're going to do. But the test of the Republicans, and it's going to have a big impact. I'd be interested in Lee's reaction to this in particular. I bet she's seen some of this in polling. The Republicans have to be able to go to the country in 2018 and say, we have repealed Obamacare and replaced it with something better, and we lived up to our promise to cut your taxes and reform the tax code. And maybe it's not going to be as big and broad as we'd originally hoped, but they got to get these things done so that they've got an accomplishment to go to the American people on.
Lee?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think without the actions behind the promises and the words, there's no way that it's going to look at all good in 2018. And I totally agree with what you were talking about as the messaging needing to come out of the White House. It's focused on jobs, economy, growth, opportunities, all of these things. That's what's polling well. What's not polling well is conversations about the fake news in Russia.
I'll also add one quick thing. If they pass tax reform or tax cuts at the end of this year, or toward the end of this year, and don't make it retroactive, and you have people waiting until 2019 to see any benefit from the tax overhaul, y'all are going to lose, the Republicans. I'll leave. I mean,